the live service body counts just keep climbing. 2023, and we got the biggest wave of live service shutdowns, I think, since live services really started to blow up. I don't know if that's because of timing, like everything's just falling in line at this point, or it's because developers and publishers are finally realizing that the amount of resources that it takes, the amount of development power it takes to run a live service, it's catching up with them, and so they got to shut it down. I mean, you got Apex Legends Mobile, that got shut down. Battlefield Mobile, that wasn't even really a thing yet, and that got shut down already. Then you got Babylon's Fall and Crossfire X. Those were terrible games anyway, so we don't miss those. But then you have games like Knockout City and Rumbleverse. In 2021, Knockout City was my second favorite game out of the 27 games that I played that year. That game was nominated as Best Multiplayer Game at the Game Awards. That game couldn't even survive. And then you have Rumbleverse. Both of those games were good, but yes, at the end of the day, they didn't have enough meat on them. And then you have Redfall. Doomed from the beginning. That's how Redfall was. When you have a studio with a bunch of developers who are not inspired to work on the game that they are working on, I don't care what industry you are in. When people aren't motivated and inspired to work on the thing, it's not going to be good. It might be mediocre, but it's not going to be good at best. To some people, Redfall was mediocre. But when 70% of your studio leaves because they don't want to work on a thing, yeah, that's not going to work. And Redfall was posited as a live service at some point. It didn't come out as one, but it was going to be one. And they didn't have what it took to make it. So what's the lesson here? At the end of the day, devs need to abandon live services and embrace more limited experience type of games. And what do I mean by limited experience? I mean games that have a beginning and they have an end. That's what I mean by limited experience. So publishers like ZeniMax putting Arkane Austin on a live service game, that's not what they were experienced at. Live service isn't for everyone. Not every development studio can make a live service game. Not because they don't have the talent, not because they don't have the capability to figure out how to make a live service game. But if your studio isn't equipped with the proper people who have the experience to make a live service game, then you don't have time to figure out how to make a live service game. When your studio is experienced in single player games, making a single player game or a limited experience type of game is different than making a live service game. It's not quite the same thing. You're not employing the exact same strategies in order to do that. Now, can I lay out the ABCs of what that looks like? No, but we know it's different. It takes a different style. It takes different expectations. It takes a different type of planning in order to get a live service done. It's the reason why Overwatch 2 dropped PvE, because there wasn't enough resources dedicated to the live service aspect. So instead of taking people off the live service, putting more on the PvE, and not launching Overwatch 2, that's a huge point. Don't launch Overwatch 2. Leave the servers for Overwatch up, put more people on the PvE so that could be developed. Once that's developed, then you release Overwatch 2 to greater fanfare, because now you got the PvE, Overwatch is back in all of its glory, and people get to enjoy the game again. But instead, they decided to shut down PvE and invest back into PvP because of money, because the live service, because that was suffering. And so they didn't want to lose the players. They already had this wheel going. And even Overwatch, Blizzard, a studio that's been doing this for a while, they struggle with live service. So you can imagine Arkane Austin, a studio with a bunch of developers who specialize in single player games. Single player, at least, type of games. They were not interested in a multiplayer or a live service game. You can imagine this was not going to work from the very beginning. And so that is why ZeniMax should have embraced Arkane Austin's specialty and allowed them to make a limited experience type of game, a single player game. Or I specifically say limited experience because the co-op isn't really the big deal here. They didn't necessarily want to do that, but that's not the big deal. Borderlands is a co-op game, but it's still limited experience. It's an extended one because of the end game and it's a looter shooter, but Redfall kind of falls in that same line. Still, there's a beginning and there's an end, and ZeniMax didn't respect that. So this is where we ended up with Redfall. And so, the other reason why it's so important to embrace limited experience type of games more is because there's only so many hours in the day. I love Halo, but I don't play Halo Infinite anymore. I like it, I enjoy it, but I'd rather play Overwatch. It's just a better package as a live service game. But I don't even play Overwatch anymore. Why? Because Diablo 4 is out, and that's a better package than Overwatch. I got a daughter, I got a full-time job, I got a family, I got time for multiple live service games. But even if you do, at the end of the day, all you Destiny players, yeah, you'll go check something out. Absolutely, you will go check out the latest thing happening in Apex, maybe in Fortnite, maybe in Fall Guys, Rocket League, whatever the case may be, but you always come back home. All you Fortnite players, you've been playing it for a long time, you've been playing it since day one, you try out other stuff, you take a break from Fortnite, you get bored with it every what, but you always come back home. David Burdett, lead editor at Gaming Trend, co-host on the Gaming Trend podcast with me. He'll play all kinds of stuff. We talk about it on the podcast, but he always comes back to Call of Duty. That's his home. So ZeniMax, for whatever reason, thinks that because Redfall or Arkane Austin, they can make games, they think it's a good idea to put Arkane Austin on a live service game with untrained live service developers and have them make a game in a crowded market with juggernauts that exist like Destiny 2, Fortnite, Apex Legends, World of Warcraft, Overwatch. We can even throw Fall Guys, Rocket League, Rainbow Six Siege, right? These AA kind of live service games. Not quite peak, but still pretty good. At this point right now, Redfall ain't got nothing on those. So how is that supposed to work? Well, you might say, well, okay, Anthony, perhaps they were trying to make a live service for their audience. It's a fine thought. I can understand where that comes from, but it's not practical. Because you got to ask yourself, who is Arkane Austin's audience? Well, it's people who play single player games. And even more specifically, it is people who play Arkane single player games. The type of people who would play Dishonored, the type of people who would play Deathloop. So unless Redfall was meant to feel like a single player game, even with like co-op aspects on it, then it was never going to work with the audience. This was always going to be a mismatch. Let's look across the industry broader. Sony and PlayStation, they plan on making 12 live service games in 4 years. 12 live service games in 4 years. Who's got time for all that? I don't even know how this plan works. Sony just bought Bungie, who runs one of the biggest live service games right now. Most people play that. If Destiny plans to end, perhaps this plan makes more sense. But if Destiny plans to continue, people are going to continue to play Destiny. Meanwhile, PlayStation and Sony, they're launching all these live service games within this 4 years. And we can make the argument that they are making them with specific audiences in mind. For example, The Last of Us Factions multiplayer. That live service game, which is on rocky ground right now. We can say that's for the Last of Us players. Okay. They are already playing live service games. So you have to bank on the idea that your live service game is good enough, which in this case, I guess The Last of Us wasn't, but you have to bank on that fact for people to stop playing the live service game that they are playing and get into that live service game. You also have to bank on the fact that the people who play The Last of Us, single player oriented players, care about a multiplayer game. Now, there were some when The Last of Us originally launched, there were a subset of people who played the multiplayer game and enjoyed it. I certainly was one of them. I liked the multiplayer. But there wasn't, I can't even say, we'll say maybe a quarter of those players played The Last of Us and enjoyed the multiplayer. We'll say about a quarter. That's not going to be enough to justify The Last of Us Factions multiplayer. Like, that's not as a live service. Even if it was half the audience. It's a big audience, but it's still not enough to justify a live service for X amount of years. Like, that doesn't sound like a game that's gonna last over 10 years. Like, Destiny lasts for 10 years because the audience is enormous. Fortnite has lasted as long as it has, probably will last for 10 years because the audience is enormous. Apex Legends, same thing. The audience is enormous. Rainbow Six Siege, kind of dwindling. Overwatch, kind of dwindling. And the more live service games that come out, audiences will become more split unless they just stick with the game that they consider home base. And so Sony's going to launch 12 of these. I don't see that working. Bungie is even testing their luck with launching Marathon, which will be a extraction shooter. That's also live service. So again, if Bungie plans on running Destiny and Marathon, they are splitting their own audience. It's not a big split, but it's still a split. There are people who are interested in Marathon simply because it's Bungie and or because it's a Bungie shooter. So you got Destiny players who are like, they really like their extraction shooter, but they always go back to home base. Now you're going to make a Bungie first-person shooter extraction shooter? That's all those extraction shooter players needed. And they go over there. Goodbye, Destiny. At least for a time. Until either Marathon proves it's not worth sticking around, or Bungie employs some kind of business strategy where they offset events between Destiny and Marathon so they don't overlap, so players can move back and forth. That would make sense. I'm fine with that. Unless after the final shape and whatever expansion comes after that, Destiny is done. Okay, then they transition over to Marathon. In that case, sounds like a great plan. But at the end of the day, there's just not enough time for all these live service games to exist. And so, developers, publishers need to focus on limited experience type of games. That is where money still is. If your studio is not equipped for live service, I would say don't play it. Don't do it. Don't make it. Don't play it. Don't invest in it. Do what you're good at. Arkane Austin was good at single player experiences, not live service. I feel like publishers and developers are understating the value of single player, co-op, limited experience type of games. They're cheaper to make. Relative. Still expensive to make these games, but they don't have that long tail expense that you have to deal with. You have the budget. Stay within the budget if possible. If you go over budget, okay. But you understand what I'm saying. You don't have to do a whole bunch after. It's got a beginning and it's got to end. We want balance in everything, but balance doesn't mean 50-50. In this case, we need more limited experience games from studios that specialize in those. Because here's the thing. If a studio like Arkane Austin is making a live service games, that means they are not making something that they specialize in, and they're robbing you of that experience. They're robbing you of that opportunity. A lot of people are like, I will not be able to play Prey anymore. And you certainly will not be able to play Prey anymore since 70% of the Prey developers left. So instead of making a live service, give the people what they want. I don't know why publishers seem to forget that. Give the people what they want. Ain't nobody asked for a live service game from Arkane Austin. Nobody asked for that. Nobody was looking for them to do that. It didn't even make sense. Like, it would be one thing if Epic was like, hey, we're gonna make another live service game next to Fortnite, right? It makes sense when Bungie comes out with Marathon. It's like, it's a live service game. Oh, okay. Arkane? Like, we know that, ZeniMax. Like, why don't you know that? You're robbing people of the experience of being able to play something that they want to play, that they're interested in playing. We can get into the discussion of how much money something makes. That's different. That's business. I get that. But at least let the developers stay in their lane and do something that they have experience in. That's all we're asking. You're telling me there's no money in that? Give me a break. So how do you feel about the live service market currently? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. You know where to do that. Tap whatever thumb you like and subscribe for more conversations on the latest games and gaming news topics. I'll talk to you later.